Hello everyone, this is Kevin, this is the Yoga Life podcast. This podcast is brought to you by The Nature of Things. They are the purveyors and the crafters of pure essential oils. They've won tons of awards, they're really fancy and they do beautiful stuff. They help to make your house, your yoga room, any place smell good by giving you loads of nice oils. And all you got to do in exchange for those oils is give them money. But then when you give them money, you get a bit off if you use the promo code. And that promo code is Yoga Life. Use the promo code Yoga Life on thenatureofthings.ie once you've put your stuff in your virtual basket, and you get 10% off all products until October 31st. So check them out. Also, this podcast is brought to you by Small Changes. Organic, eco-friendly whole food store based here in Dublin. They do stuff for the house, stuff for your face, the hole in your face to put food in, and they help to look after the environment and also help to look after yourself. So if you'd like to come to one of my workshops, you can come to the next one, which is December 14th, which is a handstand workshop in Salt and Soul in Sligo. So that's, on a Saturday. If you'd like to come down, we're going to make a bit of a day of it. It's a 2-hour workshop in total, and you can always maybe, make a weekend of it. Stay in a hotel, stay in an Airbnb, do something like that. If you enjoy this podcast at any stage, please leave a review on iTunes or share it with your friends on your Instagram stories, or actually tell someone. That'd be fantastic. This podcast today, this episode, is with Niamh Daly. Niamh specialises in the area of menopause, so premenopause, postmenopause, but perimenopause, the bit that's in the middle between pre and post. So we talk about menopause, and I think this episode works well because I ask kind of dumb questions because I don't know much about menopause, believe it or not, and I only know about hot flushes from what my mum tells me. So hopefully you learn a bit as well, and we start to understand more about a topic that probably doesn't get enough attention, particularly in Irish culture. So yes, that's it. That's Niamh. She was fantastic. She was great fun. I hope you really enjoyed this episode. Without further ado, here's the lady herself. Hey Niamh, how's it going?
I am good, Kevin. Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me.
I've been listening to your podcast. You've been on a few, haven't you, so far?
Yeah, for one thing and another, yeah. But it's becoming really important to me to reach a wider audience with what I want to share,
Yeah, and I think what I've realised on this podcast is, although I'm speaking to a lot of yoga teachers, they have different offerings. I mean, because yoga encompasses so many different things, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
And particularly your subject area that I mean as a man I will never experience it, and that is menopause. Why is it called menopause and not menostop?
That is a very good point. That is a really good point. I mean, certainly at the beginning of your journey towards menopause, your menses are pausing because they don't suddenly stop, but I don't know why, unless maybe
sounds a bit harsh,
thousands of years back, maybe we started menstruating again when we were living till we were 400. I don't know. And those cavemen, those guys made up the name. Highly likely.
Those cavemen guys. and there's post, there's there's premenopause, there's postmenopause, but a term that you've introduced to me is perimenopause.
Oh wow, I've introduced that to you. I'm delighted.
What's that?
So that's the bit actually that most women journey with in a way that can be very varied and either fairly smooth or really, really difficult. So really when people are talking about menopausal symptoms, they are actually talking about perimenopausal activities in the body. So menopause is when all of that just flatlines. The estrogen comes to a steady low and the progesterone comes to a steady low, and you're just simply not menstruating, but you're also, for most people, not experiencing the highs and lows of perimenopause. So perimenopause can mostly starts in your 40s, can even start in your 30s, but often women don't realise they're in it. They just think their body is breaking down. So that's perimenopause, and that's what I'll be mostly talking about in terms of what yoga can help with and what women really struggle with.
Yeah, and you mentioned, I know this is maybe a slightly different topic, so we can come back to it, but about how women shouldn't necessarily exercise the same way men do. What do you mean by that?
So that's something that I don't know a huge amount about, but read about recently. And this was a conversation from, or a lecture from a guy who is specialising in sort of normal, quote unquote, normal physical activity for weight loss for women. You know, so he's a personal trainer as well as being a medic, or a GP of some sort. He's in the States. And he was talking about how exercising like a 20-year-old, you know, rugby jock for a woman in her 20s or 30s, the kind of high impact stuff people do in the gym is, for a woman, is going to lower her thyroid function, really stress the body. So actually it's counterproductive for many women because our hormone picture is so different. So you guys have testosterone, we have estrogen and progesterone. They don't do the same things. So to behave in the same way physically, or to expect your body to behave in the same way physically as a woman, as a man when you're a woman, even in your 20s and 30s, can lead to thyroid fatigue. I think he didn't call it fatigue, but impact on the thyroid, which then leads to fatigue and all sorts of other things.
Well, I think also as well that the aesthetic, like say men who have a six-pack or you know, a very defined abdominals, then sometimes I think women feel like they need to have that as well, and they want to get to the same body weight as some really fit men. And I think that, from my limited knowledge on this, that women, I mean, we know that men's body weight is a healthy man, his body weight is much less, his body percentage, fat percentage is much less than a woman's. But I think sometimes we see these, say, these rare occasions on Instagram, for example, if someone has a woman with a six-pack and she's a CrossFit athlete, and some women think, I need to look like that, and therefore they're putting their body weight to an unhealthy level.
Their body fat to an unhealthy level.
Body fat to an unhealthy level. And I've experienced this. I've known people who've done that, and they stop having their periods, or their hormones are all messed up, and it's very hard to recover from that, supposedly. Have you noticed a trend in that, or what I'm talking about? I
think it's ubiquitous. We see it everywhere, and we all know the strangeness of seeing a woman bodybuilder. It's anathema to what the female shape is, to have these hardened breasts and these hardened abs and these bulky shoulders and incredibly bulky thighs. When you look at a woman who doesn't do any of that versus a man who doesn't do any of that, any exercise, a man and a woman who don't do any exercise look naturally very different. So for me, for anyone to try and emulate each other seems peculiar. And the interesting thing about fat for women is fat stores estrogen. So actually it's a really helpful organ. Fat is an organ. It's an endocrine organ. It stores hormones and releases hormones. It also stores toxins away from the vital organs. It's a beautiful organ. It's also an organ of sensuality and sexuality because it loves to be cuddled. And it's full of veins and neurology. It's not this random extra layer of goo on the outside of your body. It's a very beautiful thing. Even when you dissect a body, it's a very beautiful, shiny substance. So for a woman to get rid of that, particularly when she's coming towards her late 30s, early 40s, she's doing herself a disservice, because a healthier body weight in terms of fat layers will sometimes, often indeed, smooth your way through perimenopause, because you'll have these stores of estrogen that a skinnier woman won't have.
Yeah, that is. But then that image though you're talking about the female bodybuilder, like my sister and my girlfriend and other, they'll say, I'll be like, you should do some exercise, do some push-ups, whatever it is, Tim, I think. And but they'll say to me, have said to me, well, I don't want to get big muscles like you see the women on TV. And I say, these women, a lot of them are on testosterone placement. They're taking like steroids and stuff, and that's why they look that way. And that it won't happen to you because you don't have enough testosterone in your body.
Exactly.
So let's go back to female bodybuilders. From female bodybuilders to the perimenopause. And at what age do you start noticing or age do women start noticing the effects of menopause?
So that depends on how aware you are. And one of the reasons I want to do the podcasts that I'm doing and be interviewed and be teaching around this area is that most people don't know the answer to that question. Most women don't know, let alone men or the children of these women. So the first thing that women will start to notice that they may not relate to the change in their hormonal life is that around their early 40s, maybe late 30s, early 40s, they'll probably get this surge of feeling really energized, looking fabulous, really glowing, feeling really sexy, increased libido. They'll all start, deciding they're going to run a marathon or start a new business because you get this, the body's last surge of come and fertilize my eggs, please.
Wow.
Yeah, so you get this delicious big surge of estrogen. So estrogen has been described to me brilliantly by a woman I do some co-facilitate some workshops with. She's a nutritional therapist, and she describes estrogen as like the fantastically capable party hostess who is standing glowing in the middle of the room. She's multitasking. She knows exactly when the oven needs to be turned off. She knows exactly how to wow everybody with fabulous conversation. She makes everybody feel sexy, and she feels sexy herself. And progesterone is like the really solid, capable, listening aunt on the sofa who you can go to with your problems. And those are the things that start to fluctuate and then fall away during perimenopause and into menopause. So before it, you get a surge in your brilliance. You just feel fab. And that can be often friends or yoga students will talk about how fab they're feeling. And I'm kind of quietly going, I know what this is the preamble to, but I'm not going to talk about it to them then because it's a really enjoyable phase. So that would be, sorry to disappoint you ladies who are listening to this podcast, you now know if you get that delicious phase, it's not, well, no, it could be that you're absolutely fab. And it is that you're absolutely fab because actually we are simply everything, all of our functions are simply a response to our hormones. Everything, every part of our life cycle, everything we do from waking up in the morning to choosing when to eat, to having a nap, to going to sleep at night, everything is hormone regulated. So it is a natural brilliance. So then, even before any change in menstruation, a woman might start to notice maybe disrupted sleep patterns or warm flushes is what I used to get initially. Just not feeling like I had to take off all my clothes off to get cool enough, but just that sense of just a little bit of building heat in the body that was passing. She might get into a phase of achy joints or feeling like her body's not quite doing what it used to do as efficiently or as comfortably as it used to. But because her periods haven't changed, that's when she starts to get fearful or can get fearful because she's just looking at this body and she's thinking, okay, menopause is for people in their 50s and 60s. I ain't menopausal. So what the hell's going on? She doesn't talk to anybody about it because we can all be fairly private about our bodily health or otherwise. And if we're feeling a bit spooked by some symptom or other in our body, we quietly worry until we eventually freak out and go to the doctor. I saw a great, I think I shared on Facebook and Instagram recently, was a quote from somebody, I can't remember who, and it said, "Welcome to your 40s. If you haven't got a mysterious illness, one will be assigned to you shortly," which is exactly what it feels like. And it can feel like that for men too, but that's a separate issue. So I can't remember entirely what your question was. So.
Well, the signs of premenopause, but actually, say you're married or you're with someone and you both get into your 40s, he's going to start slowing down a little bit and then she starts speeding up, as in her libido's going up. So what kind of effect does that have on a relationship? Or am I right in that a man slows down when he's so say they're at the same age, she's in premenopause, she's thinking, right, last chance to get the eggs fertilized, as you were saying, and the husband or the partner, I mean, what's his hormones generally like at that age?
I will admit to having no idea. We all hear about the male midlife crisis, so I suspect that something goes on in a man's hormones that makes him go out and buy the Porsche, you know, those classic things, or have the affair or whatever. But in a way, I kind of think that it's probably biologically really good if the husband isn't interested in this woman's libido, because having a kid in your 40s ain't no joke. So maybe it's quite a healthy thing.
But then what does she do with that energy?
Well, she might start a business. She might go run a marathon. She might find herself sleeping with somebody else. She might find herself separating in her marriage, from her marriage. If it's, some of the positives of perimenopause are that you just don't take no shit no more. So you start to look at, am I allowed to swear on your podcast?
Yeah, of course,
Kevin?
Yeah.
Yeah, you might start looking at your life in a different light, and there can be a little disgruntlement starts to come in because your needs aren't being met.
Yeah.
Now, the difficulty is that sometimes you'll make a mistake in that time, that you might leave a relationship that's perfectly good because you're just feeling that delicious antsiness and desire, or you might be, you might be stable enough in that relationship to stay. Who knows? It's a delicate time, and it's probably good to know what's going on, actually, so that you can make your decisions wisely, I suppose.
Yeah, well, speaking as as a man, I would advise any men who are listening to this to do strenuous exercise.
In what age? At that age?
At any age. I believe. I mean, I'm nearly 38, and I am stronger, more flexible, more able now than I've ever been, because I don't. I mean, it's all relative, isn't it? I probably sound young to some people, but old to some other people. But for fellas, I mean, I have a need to to strain myself. I need that every day, like a physical exertion, that to a point where I'm like completely exhausted. I have that every single day. I have to get out of my system, and that's why it's funny. That's why me and my girlfriend is so different, because she's like real soft and gentle and into emotions and that kind of stuff. And I am too, to a certain degree, but I do. That's why I really like martial arts, fighting. I like competition, and to push myself to a point where it's feels really primal. And I think that makes a big difference to your libido, because I know lads my age who have put on weight and they going through the motions, they go for a jog here and there, and I know from first-hand experience that, well, from them telling me that they don't get their leg over anymore. It's it's once a week job, which is fine. But if your missus is going to start firing up when she's in her 40s, you got to be on your game.
Well, you never know. Maybe it will fire you up, and you will enjoy a surge for yourself as well.
Maybe.
Yeah.
So talk to me about, say, if you are. I am thinking from a man's perspective, and being the partner in this, but. So the signs you talked about when you're coming into premenopause and then perimenopause, when you're in it then, in the actual, as you said, perimenopause, how long does that last for?
So perimenopause can last between 8 and 10 years, and sometimes a little shorter, but usually not much. The good thing is that 20% of women will have pretty severe and some really struggly times with the symptoms of perimenopause. About 60% will have mild to moderate reactions to the fall off of hormones, and about 20% won't even notice it. Sometimes I listen to people giving out about women talking about the menopause, going, what's the deal? It's just a couple of hot flushes. And they have no idea of the struggle that maybe I might go through as someone who's experienced moderate to mild symptoms. And then I'm talking to women who have experienced it severely, and I'm thinking, my God, I had no idea. So that's part of the reason why I'm advocating for us all, really, in speaking about what's possible, and that if you find that you sail through it, please don't assume that it means that the people who are not sailing through it are just a bit sorry for themselves, or if they just buck up and do X, Y, or Z, they'd be grand. It really is it's the luck of the draw. We often echo our parents' menopause, our mother's menopause, not our dads, because they don't have menopause. So we often echo our mother's menopause. But the thing is, for my generation, our mothers didn't talk about their menopause, so it was swept under the carpet, an embarrassing subject. So we're the maverick generation, us 40-something women now, who are starting to speak about it and say this is what we need.
Yeah.
And the great thing is now that there's legislation being discussed in the EU about menopause leave from the workplace, and
wow.
making workplaces more menopause friendly.
Okay, so let's say because I want to talk about the extreme cases. So you're saying or let's say, what have you seen that the menopause can cause that's kind of on the extreme end?
Okay, so crippling joint pains, so you can't walk your kid to school anymore, or people who've had to give up their work because of pain, exhaustion, severe anxiety, people who have never experienced anxiety in their lives ending up on anti-anxiety medication, severe depression, people ending up on antidepressants, night sweats where you have to change the sheets 3 times a night.
Yeah.
I'm sure a few more things will come to my head.
And how do you then design a yoga practice to help that, or to ease those symptoms?
So for someone who's experiencing that severity of symptoms, and in those circumstances, I would absolutely call them symptoms. When someone's in a milder version of perimenopause, I'd try to call them traits, because symptomatic means medical, means lack of health, and actually it's not about that.
No, yeah.
So for those women, I would call that symptoms. So if someone came to me like that, I would firstly say, I can't fix you. I can help you through this journey. I would be pointing out to her when she needs to go for more targeted health in terms of medication potentially, so that she doesn't take her own life, for instance. There's, the depression can be that severe. In terms of yoga, I would probably suggest that she do one-on-one initially, and I would be mostly working with self-acceptance. I would be working with rest. One of the major, and I think probably the most impactful things about perimenopause is that your cortisol levels rise hugely and stay chronically high, and that's why yoga can be great for perimenopause. So I would be doing work with her to try and get her cortisol levels down. So that would mostly be working with restorative yoga poses and meditation and pranayama, and really helping her to soften her opinion of herself, to be kinder to herself, to work into acceptance of what's going on, to know there's light at the end of the tunnel, and really encouraging her to talk to her peers, to find support groups, that kind of thing.
So do you think then, as you're aging, I feel like as aging as a man, your exercise routine, your physical routine shouldn't change that much. But do you think that because of the menopause, you have to not do, it's basically strenuous exercise still? So
when your estrogen and progesterone start to fluctuate, your energy levels fluctuate. And when you exercise strenuously, like marathons or stuff like that, or maybe not marathons, not even just marathons, what am I talking about? Like running 10K at the fullest extent of your speed capability, or going to the gym and doing a really harsh workout, then you're raising cortisol. So cortisol raises when you are exercising strenuously, and cortisol is number one bully in the playground of the body of the perimenopausal woman. So exercising strenuously, and the other thing that women do when they're in perimenopause, because they start to see a weight gain around their bellies, is they reduce their calorie intake. And both of those things raise cortisol, and cortisol increases weight gain because of it creates carbohydrate craving. So we're getting into a cycle of, I can't sleep, so I need more. I'm craving sugary foods. I've got too much cortisol, that's craving sugary foods. And my exercise is creating cortisol. So all of those things are, and they're also increasing insulin, which is a number one fat storing hormone in the female body. So it's basically about reconfiguring what you expect of your body, but also what's healthy for it. So certainly cortisol raising activities are really the number one thing you need to avoid, because they're already high from the fluctuations of your hormones. So I would say absolutely do not stop exercising. I would say adapt. We change in chunks of about decades, particularly women and men too, but particularly women. So to not presume that your body is going to continue doing what it used to do. And when that happens, when you start to feel those differences, like the achy joints, like maybe you go running and you feel the deep fatigue after your run that you used to feel, or you have the pain in the joints, change that to a fast walk holding dumbbells instead. Or if you still really feel the nourishment of the run, but your body is feeling wrecked after it, you still have the emotional high that you need, then factor in rest. Rest after activity is a great way of bringing cortisol down. So you can still do the exercise that you've loved, but you've got to factor in, if you're a yogi, you can stick in a bit of shavasana or a restorative yoga pose, or even after a run, go for a stroll for 10 minutes after. Bring down the cortisol all the time. Factor in rest as part of your daily or your exercise activity, and that's why yoga's so great. It's got it in there.
Yeah, it's funny, like when people think of rest, sometimes they think it's being lazy. You know, they find it hard to take time off, and even in shavasana, you have to almost sell the shavasana to people. Like, this is why
some people leave the room before shavasana. Now, not much in my classes because I'm all about the squishy, but
I've heard that as well, and I've had that happen once, and I addressed it with the person to tell them I wasn't happy. And there's
keystone, isn't it?
There needs to be a good reason to do it, because it's disrespectful. Unless it's a good reason to do it, I think it's disrespectful to the other students. You know,
but it's disrespectful to their own bloody
bodies.
Yeah,
it's so true. Yeah, you know.
I meant to say beautiful bodies, not bloody bodies.
You know, so what was interesting what you said earlier about in the workplace, and how now they're starting to accommodate women.
Well, they're starting to talk about it.
Okay. But I'm what that touches on the subject of modern culture and how that affects women's health. For example, I think that in the workplace, women are encouraged to act in a masculine way, you know, to be go-getters and to never cry. If you cry, you're weak. You know, it's a bit like the Theresa May when she resigned. It became a headline that she cried. She said she was up on the podium outside number 10 Downing Street, and she said, she did this whole speech all very composed, and then towards the end you could see her starting to quiver, and she said, "It's been my honour to serve the country that I love." And as she said that I love, she started crying and her mouth opened and she had to walk off. But everyone that was watching that was like, it was a big headline, look at this woman crying. But the funny thing is that endeared her to a lot of people, like, oh, she is human. Whereas before that, they're like, who is this robot? They're like Margaret Thatcher. Okay. But that seems to be rewarded in the workplace, to be more masculine and to get ahead. So have you, I'm interested in your thoughts of, like, you know, how modern culture affects how we treat the menopause, and maybe once upon a time we were more like hunter-gatherers. Was it treated differently?
That's a really interesting question. And one thing I do want to add, actually, you reminded me of, when women will start to notice they're in perimenopause, is that emotional highs and lows. They'll be teary, they can be. I didn't get that, but some people just crying absolutely at absolutely everything, and just really emotionally, really sensitive. So how society kind of looks at it, how society used to look at it. I can't speak for the cavemen or the cave women, but I suspect that most of the women were dead before they got to perimenopause. And in the animal kingdom, there are very few species that actually get as far as menopause. In fact, the only species I've read about that gets to menopause is the whale. And the killer whale, for instance, when she gets to perimenopause or menopause, she ends up being, it seems to be from the studies they're doing, she seems to be the boss of the pod, and she's out in front when they're going places, looking for new hunting grounds. Let's say if where they are used to is run out of salmon, say, she'll show the way to somewhere else. It's like they take her on as the wise leader of the gang, the pod, whatever they're called. And I think that societally we have, in the human race, we have mocked women who are in menopause and perimenopause. We associate it with a loss, probably even before our modern day, but it would be a loss of usefulness. If we can't make babies anymore, what's the point? Some people talk about perimenopause as simply being, and menopause as simply being a construct of our medicalized age because we're living so long. So it wouldn't have been an issue before that. But I think it's so associated with a lack of sexiness, and it is associated with growing old. And the thing is that if it's happening in your 40s, it's not about growing old. And there is a beautiful life on the other side, and there is also beauty within it. But societally, it's smirked about. Interestingly, it used to be called the change, and people would speak about the change euphemistically. But actually, it's quite a good way of describing it, because that is all it is. It's a change, and all change has a struggle. It's like a butterfly trying to get out of its cocoon. It's a big old, it's pushing against the boundaries, and then what comes out at the end. So a friend of mine has rechristened it the metamorphose. No, the metamorphosis instead of the menopause. Yeah, it is actually, but it's quite, I like it. So I think women are afraid to accept that it's happening for them, especially in their 40s, because they fear the judgment and they fear that it's the end of something, whereas actually it can be the beginning of something. And I'd love to talk about that in a minute. And our teenagers and our men are not educated to understand what's going on. So women will be trying to get understanding from their partners as to how they're feeling. Yeah. And the men will be initially going, what's she on about? I don't believe her, or it's going on an awfully long time, was something that my ex said to me. And not because he was a twat, but because he hadn't been educated into the fact that it lasts for 8 to 10 years. And people will smirk when you are talking about your hot flush. My sister has joined me in making it something that she speaks about in her workplace. She talks about the fact that she's struggling right this minute with a hot flush or whatever. And she's had people say things, yeah, we all know about it, your menopause, guys shooting at a God lover. She works in the Gardaí, so it's a heavily male-orientated situation. So, and actually even women going, oh, stop talking about your menopause. So societally, it's been either brushed out under the carpet or laughed at, or even for us ourselves, we've just seen it as a sort of a tragedy. It's like, oh shit, it's all done. I'm finished now. But you just ain't.
Why aren't you then? What's the begin? You mentioned, what's the beginning with the post?
Oh, Kevin. So I think a really good question you can ask yourself when you're feeling perimenopausal traits or symptoms is, what is this asking me to address? So it's a great time for clearing out what you don't need anymore. It's a great time for simplifying. It's a time when many women will start to be able to say, no, I'm not picking that up again. I'm not cleaning that for you again. I'm not picking up the pieces anymore. No, I'm going out the door. I need to go and have a walk. I don't care if you can't cope with making the kids dinner, just bloody do it. So there's if the progesterone is the caring aunt, she's the one that makes the dinners before looking after herself. So if that progesterone is falling off, she's like, the dinners will look after themselves. I need to look after myself right now. So there can be a really lovely surge in self-care if you allow it. What happens is that you get much less skilled at multitasking, you get the brain fog, and the only way to handle all those things is to simplify. So it's a time of clearing out and finding what's important. And then if there's something like a fall off, well, in a way this is a whole other subject now. It's in terms of what yoga can do for you in perimenopause. If you're with a teacher who is menopause informed or hormones informed, or there's definitely going to be some 40-something women in most people's yoga classes, so they'll be suffering struggling with things like a fall off in libido after the perimenopause really kicks in. And to give them the potential, if you let them really tune into how their body is, to find a sensuality in the way they move instead. That it doesn't have to be about sex. It can be about enjoying your body in a sensual way, even on your yoga mat. I know that that's kind of anathema to the anti-sexualization of the human that yoga would have aimed for at the beginning, which is all about suppressing desires, as most kind of religious or spiritual practices are about. So to use it to help those students to develop their feelings of pleasure, because we all know that pleasure is good for our homeostasis.
Yeah.
So our homeostasis increases from pleasure, and our homeostasis is going to be challenged by our menopause. Just in case any of your listeners don't know what homeostasis is, it's the automatic balancing of the systems of the body in a range compatible with survival. So it's the things that make you breathe, make your heart beat, make you digest. All those things are better when we experience pleasure. It's also yoga is something that can really increase your self-esteem. And I'm developing a course at the moment for teachers to learn about how to teach yoga for menopause, but also with women who are menopausal or perimenopausal. They need their self-esteem boosted. So a lot of younger teachers, I'd say particularly in the very robust styles of yoga, like I think you teach, they may start finding that their 40-something women start dribbling away. They start leaving the class and not coming back because they're probably looking at the younger ones around them in the room still able to do the things they used to be able to do. And it might not be that the woman still can't do it. She might be doing it and thinking, am I feeling that that's still good for me? Or is it still serving me? And she might be pushing to try and make it serve her, but her instinct is telling her it's not. So she might be looking around at the 30-somethings and going, all I can see is how fab they are and how they are what I used to be. And so she might disappear from your class because her self-esteem will be lowered by that. So to find a teacher, or for teachers to learn that women in their 40s need those adaptations of yoga postures to be made the norm instead of the exception, so that they are deliciously accepted into your class and deliciously brought into the passionate highest level of your teaching, rather than an also ran in the back of the room who needs a tweak here and there.
But you touched on something there about pleasure, and you mentioned sexuality, but also sensuality. I mean, it's important to differentiate them. Pleasure, like I get pleasure in, say, like I really love jiu-jitsu, even though I don't do it much anymore. And jiu-jitsu, the objective is to strangle the other person. and I am like, I love like practicing handstands until my arms can't hold me up anymore, and I just collapse. That's pleasure for me. But it's so important that you distinguish for yourself and define for yourself what is pleasure for you and what is punishment.
Yes.
Are you doing this movement or this activity because you feel like you have to do it and you're punishing yourself? And I think that on the surface level, you see people doing, say, like a handstand practice. One person maybe is loving it and they live for it and they're like, God, I feel alive, like I do. Or the other person's like, shit, I should really do my handstand practice and my wrists are killing me and I'd rather be doing yin yoga.
Yeah.
That person is not getting the same benefit because they're punishing themselves instead of pleasuring themselves. But I do believe that if you are the kind of, if you like having a bit of dark chocolate and maybe half a glass of red wine, I talked about myself there. I had half a glass of red wine the other day, which I don't drink, and some dark chocolate. And for me, that's pleasurable, you know, and that's good for me, as opposed to if I was to eat some steamed broccoli and be like, oh, this is shit, isn't it? So being healthy and looking after yourself doesn't necessarily mean you're eating kale every day or doing doing planks every day, but that's why I think it's so important to be a sensual person, to be in touch with your senses. But when we hear sensuality, we sometimes think sexuality. And you hear the word touch, you don't think platonic touch, you think sexual touch. And this and maybe this is because of the Irish culture and English culture, where we've really shied away from sensuality, and therefore now we think it a bit of sexuality. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, no, absolutely. This is precisely what my teaching hopes to give in my what I call yin-stinct yoga, which is the yin, the permissive, the feminine, the kinder, the more intuitive and internally aware and moving with your instinct. And the Petra Fulham at Earth Cook Eat, I think is her Instagram page, who I do the joint workshops with nutritional therapy and yoga, would talk about food in that respect as well. So I love hearing you talking about the wine and the chocolate and the broccoli and the kale. She talks about how much, and I talk about in my yoga, how much pleasure assists in our digestion of the benefits of either our yoga or our food. So if you're eating a mound of lightly steamed broccoli, you will get less, and not enjoying it, you will literally physiologically take in fewer minerals and vitamins from that broccoli than if you ate it, say, with, I don't know, with bloody chocolate on top of it, if you like broccoli and chocolate. If you enjoy the broccoli, you will get more physiologically, scientifically measurable nutrients from it. And I think that that's got to be the same with exercise practices. So I think you're absolutely right. Doing a handstand practice when you'd much rather be doing some yin is anathema to your benefit. So, but I also think that the pleasure you're getting from your handstand practice is slightly different than the pleasure I'm talking about. I'm talking about literally physiological pleasure, not the kind of, well, maybe you get I'm sure you get the physiological pleasure too. I'm not talking about the, woo, that was great, that was fun, I really enjoyed the challenge. That's a kind of serotonin high and a joy. I'm actually talking about the pleasure you get through physical feeling, like I was talking about the beauty of how sensual our fat layer is. So feeling touch, as you say, which is non-sexual or sexual. But if you're in a yoga class and you've got the yoga teacher giving you hands-on and you're enjoying that, that's a kind of pleasure you can go back and find again and again at that teacher's class. I think exercise, pushing yourself in all those things without a modicum of pleasure is disastrous. And that's why I hope that people, not only perimenopausal people, but particularly perimenopausal, because they'll be knackered and they'll be feeling disgruntled with their body, that they go to a teacher who helps them really interocept. Is that a word?
Oh, I like it.
Develop their interoception as the eighth sense, their deep awareness of what's going on in the reactions of their body, no matter what they're doing, and use that, not only develop the awareness of what you like, but bloody respond to it, Kevin. Because so many people are going, I just don't want to do this plank anymore, but they ignore it. They keep doing the bloody plank because everybody else is doing the plank and their wrists are aching. What the hell? It's doing yoga for the sake of yoga, or doing yoga for the sake of what? I don't know. It seems to me that doing yoga for the sake of giving yourself unless you're aiming for samadhi, right? Unless you're aiming for enlightenment and union with the divine and leaving this earthly body, why not use yoga to help you move more smoothly through your life instead of to get better at your handstands? And being good at your handstands might be, as you're saying, one of the things that helps you move more smoothly through life, because it gives you a lovely serotonin high and you spend the rest of your day really enjoying the achievement that you've had. I'm not asking for people not to look for achievement, but the achievement is about how can I use this to move more smoothly through my life. So I'm happy to teach someone who's an athlete. I'm also happy to teach someone who simply wants to be able to walk their dog still when they're 89. So that's what I mean by functional yoga. When I teach functional yoga, it's about using these practices to function safely, healthily and freely in your life, rather than to achieve a last aim. And I think when a woman's body is changing, that's a really important thing to permit herself.
Yeah, but what you said there about someone holding a plank and they know they're essentially punishing themselves, that is a really hard transition to take in yoga practice. When you say, you know what, I'm just going to do a child's pose, I don't care what people think of me. That is so hard for people to get there, and it takes ages. And that is obviously, the ego, and we're all social beings, and part of us wants to feel like we can keep up. But I you can say it as many times as you like to the student, oh, take down dog or a child's pose. And you can say it loads and loads of times, but it often takes practice and years of them eventually saying, yes, I'm going to take a child's pose. But speaking about pleasure, though, and this is kind of like just came into my mind with handstands. What I like about handstand in particular is that a year ago, I couldn't do one, and I thought, how does someone stand on their hands? I don't get it. How their legs stay up and the legs aren't going everywhere. And every time I do one now, I think, I learnt this. I learnt this just consistently doing it, refining. And it makes me realise that I can learn anything at any time. I was terrible in school. I was very bad in school, like in terms of my development. And I didn't know what the purpose was. And anyway, that's another story. But the point is, what I realise now is that at any age, you're not defined after you leave university at 21.
Oh God, no.
And like, all right, now I need to be a lawyer, and that's what I'm going to do. You can learn anything at any age if you put in the time and the effort and you have a system. That's the first thing I love about handstand. So when I'm actually in a handstand and I'm breathing, I'm like, shit, this is pretty cool. I've learned this myself through being disciplined, because I used to never be disciplined. The other thing is,
you found your passion, that's why.
Yeah, I guess. And when I'm talking to people about the splits or about dealing with your ego and stuff, I'm like, this is all learned behaviors. It doesn't just come to us. We have to basically talk to ourselves like we're our own best friend and coach ourselves through life, whether it's a handstand or whether it's through being a better listener to your missus or whatever. The other thing, though, is that when I'm doing a handstand, I look at my hands afterwards, my forearms, I can see all the veins and stuff, and I'm like, I'm strong. I refuse to let time make me weak, and I know death is coming to us. We are only eventually going to get weak. Our bones get more brittle, but it's almost like every time you do something physically, I feel like I'm kind of defying father time, as it were. And also as well, my dad is a manual worker. His dad was, so my dad built this, what we're sitting in now, and he built the whole thing from scratch. He did the plumbing, he did the electrics, he did the interior, the exterior, the whole lot. He does everything. Great. And I like to be physical because I feel like I'm carrying on the Boyle physicality. I'm not. It's weird, when I used to work in an office, I see like fellas typing on the keyboard and they've got like small hands and skinny fellas, and I'm like, I don't know, it's cool, fair play to you and stuff, but it doesn't resonate with me. Like, I like physical exertion because that's how I value myself.
It's in your genes
It's in my genes. Sometimes I think we overanalyze stuff too much. We have to justify why we are certain ways. It's in my genes to be physical. So anyway.
Well, what I would love to respond to that as well is that, well, one thing I would say contrary to that is that you can't cheat Father Time. That's going to happen. And you will find that it might not be, though, Kevin, till your 70s that you'll stop doing handstands, and that's fab. And you might still do them in your 70s, but, that doesn't mean you've cheated Father Time. That means that your body is quite good at doing handstands and you've just found the technique. So I would say that it's not that not everyone can achieve everything by diligence and perseverance. So you posted recently about skeletal differences. Not everyone can learn to do the splits. Not everyone can learn to sit in lotus without damaging their labrum in their hip socket. It's just physiologically impossible. If you've internally rotated hips, no amount of practice will make you do a safe lotus position. So I would vehemently oppose the idea that if a yoga student isn't managing to do X, Y, or Z pose, it's because he or she isn't trying hard enough, or that language that comes in yoga of like, you're blocked, or, there's something wrong with the way you're practicing. No, it might be to do with your physiological structure. One of the statements that is ubiquitous in yoga is practice and all is coming. And I think that's a really dangerous statement, because practice and all is coming is not the case in the way that it can be understood. No matter how much you practice, some people will never be able to do those, legs behind the head poses. However, it's probably more the meaning of practice and all is coming is to do with keep practicing, and the all that is coming is actually awareness, a discovery of the center of yourself rather than the postures. So
that's a good point, because I think I was kind of exaggerating for effect when I say I can learn anything at any stage, as in I can learn the process. But I know there's some things, for example, sitting in full lotus, I'll never be able to do, probably because my body's not shaped that way, my hips are not shaped that way, and in fact, actually, to touch on that, and I know we mentioned it earlier about men and women and in a class. So when you're in, and I actually want to go on to, because we've got some questions from Instagram.
Oh, great.
Just that
Good.
you know, and one of them is kind of around this question. So maybe I'll just ask their question. You know,
Sure, yeah.
So it's on the phone, and this is because it's a question that I wanted to ask you anyway. So let me go into my Instagram.
I'll just do some elevator music while I'm doing it.
Okay, cool.
Phew,
Oh, here we go.
saved.
Now, which one should I start with? So let's start with this one. Let's start from the beginning, which is generally the best place to start.
That should have been my elevator music. Start from the very
yeah. You can sing, I can't.
Biological.
So okay. I can learn anything though. Okay, so the question I put up though was, I said, speaking with Instinct Yoga tomorrow on the podcast about pre, peri, and post menopause, and how women shouldn't be exercising the same as men. And I put that as a little bit of a kind of
Come hither.
exactly notice me, get attention. And one of the questions was, so when you're in a class and you're teaching the class, how do you explain the differences between women and men? And this is kind of my little spin on this question, while not upsetting anyone. Let me give an example. So I'll say, okay, look, sitting in full lotus or even sitting in sukhasana, cross-legged,
Yeah.
which is called easy pose, and I don't find that easy. I find this pose difficult, so therefore I prefer to sit in virasana, hero pose, which is kneeling down. And I'll say, because my hips are quite small, I've got a small pelvis, and it's narrow, and the way my femur sits in the socket, that type of thing. And then I'm saying, and that's typical, you know. And I want to say, like, you know, men are like this typically, but then I don't want women to feel who can't sit in sukhasana that they're like a man.
Yeah.
So how do you handle those situations? What do you say when you, for example, in lotus or sukhasana? What do you say to people?
So I think that the male-female differences in terms of yoga practice is probably less pronounced than the more kind of gym and marathon running differences in terms of what you should allow your body to do or try to strive for in your body. So I would say that if there was an issue with sukhasana or lotus pose, I would just speak generally to the class and say that the rotation of your hip sockets will determine whether you can do this or not. So if you find it easy to sit cross-legged generally, you probably have fairly externally rotated hip sockets, and if you find it hard, you probably have fairly frontally rotated hip sockets. So honor that and use supports for your knees or choose this kneeling position. So I wouldn't make that gender specific. The only time that I would talk about gender specifics would be, let's say a guy was doing face down dog and he was finding it really difficult. Now I don't teach face down dog with straight legs anymore. This is pretty radical. I don't teach any forward bends with straight legs anymore. We can talk about that another time if you want.
No, I'd like to talk about it now, but you can finish the
when
point and then you go on.
So I would say in that circumstance, if a guy was saying, oh God, I can't do this, or oh God, it's really hard, or I look at those, they can do it really easy, looking over at some women in the class.
Yeah.
I would say it in a way to help him to self-accept, I would say, but that's normal for a lot of guys. Guys genetically will often have shorter hamstrings because of their sporting life, but also just physiologically it's likely that you have shorter hamstrings. So I would only use a gender specific in terms of encouraging someone to accept his body. I wouldn't feel the need to do it otherwise.
Okay, why bent legs?
Okay, so even though I started off my yoga journey with Iyengar yoga, which is not as ferocious as, say, Ashtanga yoga, I still injured myself early on. So I would have injured my body when I was in drama school doing some crazy acrobatics and stuff. My back went out quote unquote. I don't know how else to describe it. People will understand what I mean, though, who suffer from back issues. And this was way before I did yoga. Then I found yoga when I was close to 30 before I started yoga. And I continued because I was, quote unquote, good at it, especially in the eyes of my teacher, who was an extraordinarily experienced teacher. She used to train Iyengar teachers, and she used to use me as someone to demonstrate poses because she thought I was, quote unquote, good at it. Mm-hmm. So I thought I was fab. So I kept working past the pulling in my coccyx and sacrum. And I know that in many of the times when my back went out since I started yoga, that though I wouldn't admit it to myself or to my yoga students when I became a teacher, I know that doing straight-legged forward folds was constantly and damagingly pulling on my sacrum and coccyx. And since then I've learned the biology around that if you're straight-legged forward folding, the hamstrings are pulling the pelvis down and the spine is pulling the sacrum up, and that is destabilizing the sacroiliac joints. So once I stopped, I had a chronic, perpetual sense of bruising pain in my coccyx and sacrum for about 10 years. And once I stopped practicing with straight legs, I no longer have that pain. If my back still goes out, and it's a family weakness, so it's a genetic thing again, it stays out for much less time. It's much less severe. It never stops me walking anymore. I also have changed my ways, which is that I tell my yoga students that my yoga has injured me, and that's why I have adapted, and that for most people, unless you're hypermobile, you will destabilize your sacrum, and if you're hypermobile, your sacrum is already unstable anyway. So I am pretty maverick in the way I'm teaching now. And you were talking earlier about how do you convince people to do child's pose instead of dog. In my classes now, most people will choose the gentler option because I will teach them from the ground up. So if I'm teaching cobra, I'll first have them lie flat on the ground, and I'll explain to them that lying on your belly is already a back bend. Lying on your belly with your forehead and your hands, lifting up, sitting up a little like you're looking at it, reading a book on the floor, that's a back bend. So I'll talk them from the ground up rather than from the advanced down. I also, for instance, don't even teach cobra with the hands on the mat anymore. My hands come off the mat now.
Me too.
Great, that's great to hear, Kevin. Because the shoulder issues that were going around the classes and see, the thing is when you start, you were talking earlier about, do I know X, Y, or Z person? And we have famous people, and people who are famous to us dependent on what we love. So because I'm into functional yoga, biomechanically safe yoga, adapted yoga, I would have done intensives with Donna Farry on sacroiliac health. On the Facebook forums that I'm interested in, it's all about what can we do to change the way yoga is taught, because so many people are injured and they're not admitting it. And so many teachers are hypermobile and they won't admit that. But they have students looking at this hypermobile teacher who's just pretending they're bendy like this, even pretending to themselves they're bendy like this because they're so fab at yoga. So how can we help our teachers to notice what isn't helpful and be capable of admitting it without the fear of losing students. I just have different kinds of students now. I have the ones who need yoga to stay sane, they need yoga to stay mobile, and they need yoga to stay strong for the life they lead, rather than as a sport with an end game or a practice with an achievement sort of sense with it. But they do feel an achievement, because they feel the achievement of, wow, I feel really calm, or I went home and I didn't scream at the kids, or all those kind of things. And physical, I have marathon runners in my classes as well, and they find the physiological benefits too. It doesn't have to be extreme to be incredibly physiologically, mentally and emotionally delicious.
Do you think, though, do you supplement your yoga practice with weightlifting?
Oh, I supplement it with lovely things. So that was actually, I'm glad you asked that, because one of the things that when you were talking about the handstand practice, one of the most important things about the body is that it loves and needs variety.
Yeah.
In food and in physical practices. Yeah.
I just put my hands in the air, by the
did.
way, in a kind of, I'm rejoicing that you said that, because that is so important. Variety is key. Go on.
And I think what's really difficult is that with the new studio culture, which, you know, when I started teaching yoga, there was maybe like 2 yoga studios in Ireland. Now there's so many studios, and God love them. They're providing a brilliant service, but it costs a fortune. So they sell memberships, and they sell yoga as something that can tick all the boxes. It can't tick all the boxes. You have to go and do some strength training as well if you want to maintain. It can help with muscle mass and bone density, and certainly I teach in that way. But you might need to go and do some actual weightlifting. I don't personally do it, but I do my yoga practice in a way that I'm kind of my muscles are behaving as if they're weightlifting.
Yeah, I get you.
But I also do 5 rhythms dancing. I also go for fast runs, or not fast runs, very slow run on a beach. I'll swim in the sea. I'll go for a slow, did I say slow run on the beach? Slow run on the beach. Or fast walk, hike.
There you go.
Know, you need to do thank you, sorting out my head. Actually, my brain fog isn't even really bad at the moment, but I still need someone to sort me out from across the table. You need variety in your tissues, because if you just do yoga, you'll be good at yoga.
And when you say just yoga, to people who are to be more specific, if you're doing sun salutation, Surya Namaskar, AB all the time, the same thing, the same cadence, the same breath, you need to change up time under tension, resistance, frequency of training as well. Like, do you take rest? If you're doing the same thing every single day, that's not good. You need to surprise your body. But as you mentioned there about weightlifting, people think, oh, like, I mean, you can do like active stretching instead of passive stretching, for example.
Yes, don't get me started.
But this I think is the teacher's responsibility to educate people about this, and it's easy enough to switch off and go, right, we're just gonna do the same thing we always do. But I like to, when I teach a class, I have a 5-minute intro, and that's a short one for me, because I want people to know this is the purpose, this is why I've designed it this way, and we're always going to be doing something a little bit different that complement each other, because your body wants variety. But I do think though that, like, lifting, I mean, there's no you can do loads of things like pulling motions. You can use pulling muscles. Like when you do a cobra with the hands off the floor, or locust pose, you are using your back muscles. You're pulling your chest off the floor. But equally, I do think that if you're doing, say, handstands or planks or chaturanga, you need to be hanging. Hanging is so important, for like just a simple dead hang from a pull-up bar. Not doing a pull-up, but hanging, because that's the way that's so good for our shoulders. I mean, if you believe we're originally from primates, and they are distant relatives, these type of things, I think, like, in some teachers' heads, they think, well, if I say that, people are going to stop coming to my classes and start doing TRX or pull-ups, and they're not going to come to classes. But I think you're doing people a disservice if you don't tell them that.
Yeah, that's my absolute key thing, is that I have to risk that I'll lose people if yoga is not for them, because I can't pretend that it's for everybody. And doctors kind of blanket recommend it for back issues, and they don't know what they're recommending. They might recommend they'll say to somebody, go to yoga for your back issues, and then that person who's never done yoga before will Google yoga, come up to a Ashtanga class and pull their back ridiculously, when actually what they need is a therapeutic yoga, but the GP doesn't know that. So we can't presume that yoga is good for everyone, and you have to trust that you might lose some people, but you'll gain the people for whom it's right and for whom you're the right teacher. And, you know, I'm often saying on my posts, because I, as well as teaching yoga with women who are in their 40s and being a passionate, and most of my classes are for just the general population, and I teach a yoga where I actually just want to help you learn your interoception, learn what your body wants and needs, get enough information and logical education from me so that you can create your own practice in your own time.
Exactly.
And I'm always saying I'm going to just talk myself out of a job here. But, you know, when I started yoga, it wasn't a job. I think it isn't for many people. In fact, I find it really unusual and new when I hear young yoga teachers saying to me they're thinking of going full-time as a yoga teacher. And I'm like, what does that mean, going full-time as a yoga teacher? Like, it's never was a career option when I was training. It's funny.
But also to differentiate as well, because I think it's important between yoga and yogic movement. So if we think about yogic asana, so postures like warrior 1, warrior 2, static holding, isometric holds for your muscles, that is what you would call like yoga movements. But you can do yoga doing pull-ups.
Yes,
that sounds
completely, Kevin.
That sounds crazy, but like I hold onto the bar, I'm like, right, every finger is wrapped around the
Exactly.
bar. My phalanges, but like I'm holding onto the bar and I'm thinking, right, now engage the forearm, and now I'm going to pull from the scapula, and as I do that, I'm going to take my inhale, my exhale, and I'm thinking about every single thing, what am I doing with my core, my legs, and what am I saying to myself as I'm doing the pull-ups?
Yeah.
Am I like doing something I haven't done before? Am I berating myself and only doing 6 and not 7 pull-ups?
Yeah.
You can be yogic and be a yogi without even stepping on a yoga mat.
Completely, thank you. Yes, and in your 5 rhythms dancing or your run or the way you're dealing with your kids or whatever. And it's about awareness. But what you're talking about there is also kind of the koshas, isn't it? You're bringing body awareness.
Yeah.
You're bringing in intelligence, your mind. You're using your mind instead of trying to throw it out the door. You're using pleasure because the bliss layer is in there. The breathing layer is in there. So that's the koshas. There's one, the intuitive layer. Is this okay for me today? So I think instead of seeing as the koshas as things to be gotten through till we get to the bliss layer, actually bring them all onto the path with you. So you're bringing your intelligence, you're bringing body awareness, you're bringing instinct, you're bringing breath, and you're bringing bliss. You're bringing a sense of pleasure. I think that the main thing is never to go to a yoga class in blind faith, that your teacher will keep you safe and that your teacher knows all the answers, that you need to bring all your faculties with you. One of the big things I would teach, for instance, is never to kind of starfish yourself on the mat in crescent lunge. I always think of their joints like a starfish just splattered on the ocean floor, but actually biologically you can't let your joints hang passively in such an extraordinary range of motion without them long-term damaging. So actually, instead of splatting and feeling really kind of wide open and fantastically yogic and really bendy, is actually bring muscular tone into all the joints and feel more like a dolphin ready to leap out of the water instead of that passive starfish on the bottom of the floor, So it's just, I don't know.
Because we're so visual though, if you see 50 or 30 people in crescent pose or high lunge, and you're looking at them and they think, right, the higher my hands are, the lower the hips are, the better I'm doing this pose. That's what they think. Because we see that, and you're taking up loads of room, it's starfish as you said, and therefore you're thinking to yourself, well, I look like I'm doing the pose well. Whereas when I'm teaching it from the ground up, and I'll say, okay, sometimes I'll do like you put your heel on a blanket and then slightly pull the blanket towards you.
Lovely.
Like that. So, but to the untrained eye, you can't see this person moving, but they're energetically, they're moving their heel to their back knee and vice versa. They're scissoring those together. But again, it's your responsibility as a teacher to be like, I'm telling you, I know it doesn't look as impressive, but you're going to get way more out of it, and you're actually using muscular engagement. I think also as well, there is a thing of, I'm very lean. I can see all my muscles. And so I'll be like, all right, I can see that muscle engage. Whereas some people aren't as lean, and they think, well, if I can't see the muscle, I don't know how to fire it. I know that's kind of a slightly different topic, but I really do. How would you describe that as that type of yoga? Would you say integrated yoga as opposed to stretchy yoga?
For me, I would call it functional yoga.
Functional yoga.
And also biomechanically intelligent.
Ooh.
Do you know where you're?
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, where
functional's
you're aware
good,
of. Yeah, functional's good to keep you functional, but also functional within the range of what's normal for a human body. It's you won't if you move instinctually, if you move for pleasure and instinctually, you'll never injure yourself. If you were keep coming back from the to the caveman. If you were a caveman and you wanted to get comfortable in your body, you'd never do crescent lunge. You'd just be, you might have a little stretch around the fire, or you go for, you have your running to catch your hunt, your whatever, your prey, and then you're probably resting.
Yeah.
We don't do any running to catch our prey anymore, so we have to move. But if you just bring in the why. When your teacher asks you to do something, just go into your own internal why.
Isn't it? I know you're getting cold and you.
No, I'm fine. I'm very happy.
And if I
could talk for Ireland.
I'm getting a radiator in here soon, but it's funny actually. Do you notice? Just side point. We'll go back to that. Do women get colder than men?
Oh, I think so.
Yeah, weird, isn't it?
Yeah. Because metabolism. That's part of why we can't be exercising the same, as we have different bloody metabolisms. You've got to respond to our metabolisms.
Yeah, because I know, like most women I know are like, oh, I'm freezing all the time, whereas I like the cold. Anyway. But anyway, that's a separate thing. But isn't it funny how we don't have to run anymore to catch anything or away from anything, and that's why I think you see people, especially on Saturday morning, running. And we're kind of constantly playing a trick in our mind that we have to run, but we actually don't have to.
Yeah. And do you know what's a really interesting thing? Coming back to cortisol and the perimenopause thing as well, that if we don't respond to cortisol surges in the way that we would have prehistorically, the cortisol stays in the body. So cortisol is to ready your muscles to make you run, right? To run from the threat. So actually doing a burst of something intense to get rid of the cortisol can potentially, ease you from a life of anxiety, because the cortisol is there because we're worrying about money and we're worrying about this and worrying about that. So if you go and give yourself a burst of activity as if you're running from a saber-toothed tiger, then possibly you might be able to just get rid of that cortisol surge, that spooky feeling. That
thing of like long endurance run, and fair play to people who do that, but when they're you see them, they're running, their face looks pained, and what I do is I go to the football field nearby and length of the football field, and I'll just I'm gonna run as fast leg it, basically interval sprints, and I think
those are probably quite good.
Very good. As you said in the other podcast, the Social Fabric podcast, sometimes you get up in the morning. Right, even you got 10 minutes, 5 minutes, you got kids and that kind of thing. Put some headphones on. Put your favourite tunes on that remind you back in the day when you were, I don't know, whatever, in a happier time maybe.
Or just stuff that makes you
stuff that
makes move.
And just dance up and down. I do a lot of Wim Hof. I just jump on the spot and put my arms in the air and do some whoosh, like a whoosh sound, And then once I do that, I'm like, okay, now I've started to move. I'll do something else. And then I've done that. Now I'll add this on. And next thing you know, I'm there for an hour and a half doing whatever I'm doing.
Exactly.
But the important thing is to start. I'm going to quickly check the questions. Because I've just realised that we've actually answered all the questions just in talking here.
I'm delighted that people were asking, though. It's great.
It's basically all the similar thing about... we've answered all the questions that...
Is it mostly the men-women thing that the questions came in on, less about perimenopause? It's because your audience is quite young, but they're going to learn a lot now, I'd say.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there anything you wanted to finish off on?
Well, one of the things that just struck me, just you were saying about how do you persuade your students to choose face down dog, child's pose instead of face down dog. I talked about when you're initially teach from the ground up, like starting off with a back bend being just lying on your belly.
Yeah.
But also teachers demonstrate less what you can do and demonstrate more what you imagine a beginner could do.
Yeah,
so
great point.
Just don't constantly be doing the big chaturanga. Just when you're saying, and you could do this if you want to, you do that one, because the chaturanga heads are going to know their chaturanga. Show them the knees on the floor instead of the full pose.
That's so important.
Yeah. So what I would like to finish off with in terms of the perimenopause thing is that the central, a few points. I'll be brief if I can.
That's all good. It's no rush.
The central thing for teachers to encourage their students to do, and for yogis to do for themselves, is rest. So factor rest in to all your exercise habits, but just give yourself space and rest. That's what's going to lower the cortisol, and if you can lower the cortisol, your journey will be much, much smoother. Know that perimenopause is an up and down situation. There's surges of feeling good and then deep dips. the hormones fall away in ups and downs rather than on a consistent line. Funnily enough, I was just I'd written a few notes because the things that I really feel are important, and actually I just happened to say this before I read it, but I said, find a teacher who doesn't demonstrate the perfect pose, but demonstrates his or her own limits and his or her incapabilities instead of demonstrating his or her capabilities. And then for teachers, I am creating a teacher training for yoga for menopause, or yoga with menopausal people in your class, or perimenopausal. I should always say that, because menopause is a much smoother time when you're back to finding the new version of you that you've grown into. So for yoga teachers to learn about it biologically, and also regarding the myriad of possible effects and how individual they are, and for teachers to learn the language to speak about it, because some people will be happy to speak about it till the cows come home, like me, and some people won't want to speak about it. They'll want to talk about it quietly. To use your language depending on what you're hearing from your students. And for everybody to know that it's a natural phase. It can be a difficult time. It has peaks and troughs, and yoga, there isn't a part of yoga that probably won't help you if you're not pushing yourself and not judging yourself with regard to the other people in the room. There isn't a part of yoga that won't help you, because meditation will help, pranayama will help, the keeping your joints juicy, because that's the other thing with perimenopause. The joints will start to seize up a little bit, so you need to keep them juicy. Bone density, cardiovascular health, and muscle mass will all decrease at this time, so you need to work on those. Yoga will give you those, but it can't fix everything. Look for massage, look for nutritional therapy, and if you need to, go to a doctor. So that would be it.
Brilliant. Niamh, that's fantastic.
Pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks so much for listening to that episode with Niamh. Hope you learned lots about the old menopause. If you would like to leave a review on iTunes, please do. That would be fantastic. And you can also share this with your friends on your Instagram stories. As always, this podcast was brought to you by Small Changes, organic, eco-friendly store based here in Dublin that provides stuff for the house, stuff for your body to make you feel better and to look after this world that we're living in, and to basically do more for ourselves than everyone else. So check out smallchanges.ie. No online offering. You got to go in there and speak to people. And yes, that's pretty much it. Now I'm waffling. I've had too many coffees today. I hope you have a great week, and I will catch up with you next week.